this is section 3, Michigan Goodbye.
While he was in school, he was head of the organ department in 1914 and university organist in 1915. Instructor of the theory department in 1916, became an assistant professor in 1919, as well as a full professor and director of SMTD in 1923, and the dean in 1914. He was here until 1960. He composed this to be an alma mater style piece with help from with the lyrics from Donald Kahn and Fred Lawton. Fred Lawton was born in 1888. He was originally from Ontario. He moved to Michigan in 1894. He enrolled in the University of Michigan, graduating in 1911 with a bachelor's degree from the Literary College, and he was a lyricist, poet, and businessman. Donald Kahn, born in 1889, he's from New York. He studied music at Los Angeles and Eponoma College. He served as Air Force navigation instructor during World War II. He's most known for his work in the Great American Songbook.
About the song. The song was composed by Earl B. Moore.
Can I interrupt and have you just speak from the lectern?
Oh,
Thanks.
So about the song. It was composed by Earl V. Moore. The lyrics were written by Fred Lawton and Donald Kahn in 1909. It is a farewell alma mater tune with undertones of nostalgia and reminiscence. The lyrics make specific references to real places such as State Street, Tappan Hall, Barber Gym, etc. In addition, words such as remember, goodbye, and farewell are used within the lyrics. There is extensive chromaticism in the piece, which lends itself to a melancholy feel, and the song's slow tempo aids the reminiscence feelings associated with the song. On the surface, it appears to be a song used for graduation. However, it is a part of the opera Kwanzaaland. There are two versions of the tune, one which is a theatrical edition for use in the opera, and then there's another male quartet version which is used by the Men's Glee Club.
As for some of the performances, the University of Michigan Union Opera performed it at the New Whitney Theater. And then in December 15th of 1911, the Glee Club performed it on a trip to Los Angeles. The University of Michigan's Men's Glee Club is the second oldest Glee Club, and it's actually the oldest club on student campus.
Moving more into the context of the song, as we had mentioned, it was written for the opera Kwanzaaland, and it acted as the closing of Act 1, in which the protagonists of the opera, Buck and Sliv, left Ann Arbor to go to darkest Africa. So we were able to find the original program of the 1909 Union production, which included like casts, bios, musical numbers, and some pictures, including this one. So I want to point out that this cast and crew is entirely white, and we know that the second act takes place in Africa. So from this we can infer that minstrel elements like blackface were most likely used in Act 2. And upon doing further research, we learned that Act 2 portrayed African Americans as cannibals and savages. So, yeah.
So I thought it would be relevant to put in some context for the segregation and discrimination on U of M campus in 1909. So there was emphasis around the arts. For instance, Kiwanis made a net profit of, in today's money, $60,000. So obviously this was a huge production that was bringing in a lot of money. Women's rights groups were popular too, and the first African American police officer was hired in 1908. So I don't know why Kiwanis was such a success considering how controversial it was.
So, the first African American student was admitted to the university in 1853, and segregation on campus definitely continued into the early 1900s. For example, some African Americans were even forced to live off campus, like not in the dorms or in any of the residence halls. Especially like Mosher Jordan Residence Hall was built in 1930 and originally was only going to house white women until black women forced the university to let them live there. Yeah.
Okay. So, although we had to dig through a sort of dark patch of Michigan history, we were able to come up with some pretty promising themes. From a first glance, like we said, you would never guess that Michigan Goodbye belonged into the context that it does. So like we learned from the tune Turkey in the Straw, it's important you know where your material comes from. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you can't perform it, but you should be aware of how it came to be and who was possibly hurt in that process. And it's true that these are unpleasant topics to speak about, but it's really important that we do have this conversation so that we can understand what went wrong. We learned that the creation of the minstrel show was in 1828. Although Kwanzaa wasn't a full minstrel show, it maintained the same terrible characteristics that should have been realized as terrible since this happened 80 years later. No one really thought it was an issue because of how consistently racism was going on campus. It presented people of color as the other rather than including them in the Michigan community, or even in American community for that matter, since the white main characters go all the way to Africa to experience what they did in the second act. Especially when people of color have been attending the university at this point for over 50 years. So people of color were on campus, but they were continuing to scrutinize them like that. So, so we know that we use our Michigan songs to rally and show pride. And Michigan Goodbye was written to show that pride, but it was also written to exclude a large population of misrepresented individuals. So going forward, I hope that we never see a time where the Michigan community excludes a group based on race, religion, or gender, and students are able to put a stop to the violence before it happens.